huge loss of life in the Titanic disaster in 1912 was caused by outdated regulations that did not provide enough lifeboats for passengers and crew. But what became of the Titanic's lifeboats? How did they simply disappear from the story of the Titanic disaster? Most importantly, are any remaining in existence today? We know everything about how each boat was filled with passengers, lowered, and what happened between it leaving the ship and meeting the rescue ship Carpathia. This film is concerned with what happens after the Carpathia. The ultimate fate of these boats is shrouded in mystery and rumour. Could any still exist? Several boats have appeared in recent times that fit the description, but no one has yet proved their authenticity or provided a paper trail back to Titanic. Firstly, let's deal with what we know. The lifeboats, 16 clinker-built rowing boats and 4 collapsible boats, were all launched in some fashion off the sinking Titanic. Most made it to the Carpathia, the exceptions being collapsibles A and B. Collapsible A was set adrift during the night when its passengers were transferred to lifeboat number 14. It still contained 3 dead bodies when it was set adrift. Collapsible B had floated off the officers' quarters roof, inverted, during the final minutes of Titanic's life, and had been used as a raft until its survivors were rescued by lifeboats number 4 and 12. It was then set adrift. The Carpathia only had room on deck for 13 of the lifeboats that reached her. These 13 boats were hauled aboard and delivered to the White Star Line's berth in New York on the 18th of April 1912. Workers removed all identifying features from the boats that linked them to Titanic. These plates stated the name of the ship, Titanic, port of registry, Liverpool, the lifeboat number, a White Star Line burgee, which is a small metal flag emblem, and the lifeboat capacity rating. These items have surfaced in auctions and private effects down the decades. At this point, the story starts to get murky. Some sources suggest that the boats were stored in a second-floor loft between piers 58 and 59 until December 1912. It appears that souvenir hunters removed some artifacts from the stored boats. A list of the lifeboats and their equipment was prepared for the U.S. Civil Court compensation case dated the 27th of November 1912, and that still exists, which indicates that the lifeboats were still in New York at that date. However, in light of the Titanic disaster, the White Star Line rushed to equip the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, with enough lifeboats for all aboard. It's long been suspected that Titanic's 13 surviving lifeboats were simply refitted with new identification plates and put aboard the Olympic. Indeed, the Shipping Gazette and Lloyd's list, dated the 24th of April 1912, published the following 2 sentences, quote, "The Olympic, which leaves Southampton today, has on her boat deck a number of collapsible boats. At New York, the Olympic will take on board the boats of the Titanic." Unquote. The collapsible boats referred to in the magazine article were 40 collapsible lifeboats hastily brought on board the Olympic. When the crew realized that many were rotten and leaking, they went on strike, refusing to sail to New York. Therefore, the published intention of Olympic to collect Titanic's boats was not fulfilled when planned. The 27th of November 1912 court document also shows that the Olympic did not collect Titanic's boats once normal service resumed. Being clinker-built boats, storing them for months would have caused the timbers to dry out and shrink, and they would have leaked badly if used. This has led some to surmise that Titanic's boats were scrapped sometime in early 1913, or at least sold off to some third party. But what if the boats had been reused by the White Star Line? It made sense. There was a shortage of lifeboats following changes to lifeboat regulations, and Titanic's boats were almost brand new. If we discount their use aboard the Olympic, what about the Titanic's other sister, Britannic? The Britannic was sunk during World War I while employed as a hospital ship, but we can discount her, for her 48 lifeboats were larger than the Titanic's, requiring different launching davits. It is conceivable that Titanic's boats were distributed among other smaller White Star Line vessels and sold off or scrapped when these vessels went out of service. The fact is, not one piece of documentary evidence has surfaced in over 100 years, giving the boat's location beyond November-December 1912 in New York. They simply disappeared into history. In fact, we only know the fates of two of Titanic's lifeboats, the aforementioned collapsibles A and B, set adrift on the night of the disaster. The first of the two missing collapsibles to be found was B on the 23rd of April 1912. The boat was found upside down by the Mackay Bennett, one of several ships chartered by the White Star Line to recover bodies. Crewmen tried to recover it but gave up. It is said that they later chopped a hole in it to try to sink it. This would be no mean task, as collapsible boats were full of cork and virtually unsinkable. Collapsible A was spotted by the White Star liner RMS Oceanic on the 13th of May 1912, adrift 200 miles from the wreck site of the Titanic. The decomposed bodies of 3 passengers, one in full evening dress, were still inside her. The corpses were taken aboard Oceanic, wrapped in canvas and buried at sea after a religious service. The lifeboat was also hauled aboard the liner. Collapsible A was taken to New York by the Oceanic and placed in the same loft with the other Titanic lifeboats. That still left 6 Titanic lifeboats adrift on the open ocean, numbers 4, 14, 15, and collapsibles B, C, and D. Several of these boats were recorded as being seen by steamers crossing the Atlantic, including one report in July 1913 that a steamer had passed a lifeboat covered in barnacles. For these adrift lifeboats, their fate would have been relatively simple. They would have either sunk or washed ashore somewhere. But neither type was easy to sink. As I mentioned already, the collapsible lifeboats were mostly made of cork and canvas, and the regular type lifeboats, the clinker-built boats, were fitted with special buoyancy tanks, so they could float even when holed. The only way these would sink was when the timbers rotted sufficiently that the entire craft broke apart, or it was smashed to pieces by a storm or thrown up onto a shoreline. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that some fishing boat perhaps found one of these at sea and reused it. But this is entirely speculation on my part. There is literally no evidence. But this is not the end of the story. For many decades now, boats have appeared all over the world that people have claimed have come from the Titanic. The fact that 6 boats were set adrift and the remaining 14 ended up in New York has fed this possibility. It was claimed that one of the prop boats used to film the Alfred Hitchcock movie Lifeboat in 1944 was an actual Titanic relic. At least that's what owners 20th Century Fox said. This boat was auctioned about 20 years ago. There are several replica Titanic lifeboats in museums around the world, and a few prop boats from James Cameron's 1997 film. But what about a real one? Perhaps one of the most intriguing recent finds was in 2013, when a lifeboat was found abandoned in a hedge in England. Bought off eBay, where it was described as a cabin cruiser, the new owner thought it was a White Star Line lifeboat of the Titanic period. It had originally been bought in Liverpool, where effects of all White Star Line ships were disposed of, and is the same size, shape, type of wood and build quality of lifeboats in service with the White Star Line in 1912. The only authenticated White Star Line lifeboat in existence today belongs to Titanic's passenger tender, the SS Nomadic in Belfast. The lifeboat, one of 2 examples that survived the ship's conversion into a floating restaurant in Paris, was bought from a museum in France in a rotten state. The other example was burned by museum staff. Today, Nomadic's lifeboat is being restored. So in the end we are left with a tantalizing historical mystery. 6 of Titanic's lifeboats drifted away into the North Atlantic, and 14 were stored in New York and disappeared. Have any survived, unidentified to the present day? It's not impossible, but proving a cast-iron connection to the world's most infamous ship will be the test. It's a case of watch this space. I hope you've enjoyed this little mystery. If you have, please do subscribe and also share. Many thanks.